A couple of months ago, I traveled to Jacksonville, Florida to meet with one of the largest Turo hosts in the entire country. And I really wanted to answer the question, how the heck does one person operate a 200-car fleet that seems to be growing by the dozen each and every month? And fortunately for us, Alvin, a co-hosting specialist and Turo host out of Jacksonville, Florida, allowed for my husband HP and I to visit him for a couple of days to answer that exact question. Now, Alvin has been a Turo host since 2015 and currently, or I guess as I'm recording this video, is at around 13,000 trips, though I'm sure once this video goes live, it will be much more than that. Unlike me and my fleet, where I specialize in renting out cars that I own, meaning I don't have any co-owners, investors, I own all of my vehicles with my husband HP, Alvin specializes in co-hosting and investor hosting. This means that an investor will buy a car, they'll send that car to Jacksonville, Florida with Alvin, and Alvin will manage that car for them. Then each and every month, Alvin and the owner of this vehicle split the profit. Now on to how Alvin operates his fleet. The question of storage is such a common question in the world of car sharing. In fact, I would say that over the course of me being a YouTuber and being a Turo host, this is probably one of the top 3 questions that I get asked most frequently. And with me and my fleet, I have almost 30 cars, and we've been doing quite well with the 4 spots that we rent within a shopping center. But I also recognize that once you get to 50 cars, let alone 100 or more, you probably have to get a proper lot. And when it comes to storage, key exchanges, and parking cars, Alvin rents a space in a trucking lot. Alvin's location is located at a large lot that is in a relatively residential area. The lot is used for 18-wheelers and miscellaneous storage, and Alvin rents spaces by the row. So about 1/4 of the lot is dedicated to Alvin and his cars. As Alvin's fleet grows, he simply just rents more rows. One thing that I did find interesting about Alvin's operation is that he doesn't have a shop, an office, or anything like that. His lot is relatively bare bones, which is something that I talk a lot about. Keeping overhead low is crucial to the success of any business, but especially a car-sharing business where margins can be relatively low, especially with newer cars. As Alvin has his cars parked in his lot, he orients the cars a specific direction to allow for him and his team to know which cars are ready to go versus which ones aren't. If a car is facing the direction it needs to be in order to leave the facility, it's ready to go. If it's not, then it's not prepped quite yet. One aspect of managing a growing Turo fleet is staffing in your team. With any car-sharing fleet, there is a ton to do, from cleaning cars, checking in cars, maintaining vehicles, transporting cars, and of course the administration side of things like verifying licenses, uploading photos, communicating with guests, tolls. And I know that with my own fleet, this is something that I can get particularly overwhelmed with. And so I was excited to see how a large fleet owner with more than 200 cars ends up handling these different types of situations. And as it turns out, Alvin has a full team. Alvin has 2 full-time workers and himself that manage the day-to-day operations of the fleet. This could be things like cleaning cars, checking in cars, delivering cars, transporting cars, really anything that needs to get done in order to keep things moving smoothly. Then on top of that, he has a couple of part-time employees that will fill in whenever these other employees are either off work or whenever things are particularly busy. On top of this, Alvin has a bookkeeper who handles his books and accounting. And let me tell you, as someone who's impressed by clean accounting, Alvin's books are a feat in themselves. As Alvin breaks down in a really easy to understand way how much each car is making, how much each car is costing, and how much Alvin and the owner of the vehicle are making each and every month. I saw the books and financials firsthand, and let me tell you, the organization here is top-notch. This kind of goes to something that I talked about a lot in the past, and one of the key components to having success with Turo, or really any business out there, is making sure that you're treating this like a business. Start keeping track of your accounting, your books, your expenses, your income right from the start. That way, as you scale, all of your finances are nicely organized. And not only was I impressed whenever I looked at the accounting for Alvin's fleet, but whenever I talked to the investors that invest with Alvin, they had very similar things to say. Basically, there was pretty well-around praise for the fact that his accounting is so organized and well-kept. I think something many of us, including myself, can sometimes be reminded about. Books are important, and accounting needs to be stayed on top of. But one of the more surprising pieces of the staffing puzzle was the fact that Alvin hires an administrator. When Alvin's team members take photos of cars, they actually don't upload them in the app themselves. Instead, they send them to Alvin's administrator, and they upload the photos for them. The administrator handles guest communication, they handle tolls, fees, things like that. This was something that was really interesting because the idea of hiring somebody specifically for these administrative tasks, it was truthfully something that I had never really thought of. But whenever you think about it, it really does make sense. Because if everybody is in the app collecting reimbursements, communicating with guests, it can get really messy really quickly. In fact, the phrase "too many cooks in the kitchen" is really applicable to this situation. So instead, you have one person who owns those tasks, they're responsible for the tasks, they know how to navigate them, and as a result, they get done more efficiently and more consistently. It makes a lot of of sense. But the reality is actually doing the work is just one part of the equation. How do you delegate Turo work? How do you pay for the work? And how do you manage your team? This is something that I'm constantly trying to perfect with my own fleet, because the reality is managing a team in the car sharing space is extremely tricky because the work is very unpredictable. Some days there is a ton of work to do and other days there's nothing. Some days it will look like the next 2 days will be jam-packed, but then cars get extended, bookings get canceled, and all of a sudden a jam-packed day becomes very slow. And how do you keep workers retained whenever there's this constant level of unknown? And how do you keep these workers paid fairly? For HP&I, we pay our employee a flat weekly rate, and we also give him a bonus based off of the performance of the fleet. Our employee does not track his hours, and he typically works about 20 hours per week. And our thought process is that sometimes he'll work more than 20, sometimes he'll work less, but the benefit of not having to stay on top of and track hours is worth the flat rate pay for me. But this certainly isn't a perfect situation either, because sometimes this means our employee is getting paid a lot more on a per hourly basis than we'd really like. It also means that his schedule is sort of all over the place. Our employee is a very good sport about it, but I definitely recognize that this process is far from perfect. Alvin's process, though, is a bit different. Because Alvin's fleet is so large, the idea of him not having enough work isn't an issue, because there is stuff that always needs to get done with a 200-car fleet. So every night, Alvin sends a message out to his team outlining everything that needs to get done, and then as the day progresses, that list gets updated. With cars that need to be cleaned, checked in, and delivered, the team lives and breathes by this message chain. And as far as paying his team, Alvin takes a completely different approach than I do. And rather than paying a flat rate or by the hour, Alvin actually pays his team by the task. The tasks range in value, but for example, delivering a car may be a $50 task, while taking photos may be a $5 one. Cleaning cars could be $25, while dropping a car off at the shop may be $15. There is a whole ledger of sorts that Alvin and his team use to value the tasks that they complete. And then after his team is done for the day, they send Alvin the tasks they completed, and Alvin sends them payment. Again, not entirely sure which method here is better, whether you should pay your staff by task, by hour, by salary, or base. But I do think in the world of car sharing, staffing and navigating this business model is still really new. And so I think it's extremely interesting to see how different hosts, particularly large hosts, tackle this issue. Because the reality is, as your fleet grows, there's no way to do it alone. And paying your team is a big part of that equation. And it's a big part of successfully scaling as well. Now, Alvin does do remote key exchanges, which I think is relatively required whenever you have a fleet of 200 cars, because the reality is you cannot meet every single guest in person. But Alvin sort of does a hybrid remote key exchange process. Throughout the duration of my time with Alvin and his team, I saw a number of occasions where Alvin just so happened to be at the lot at the same time as a guest, and so he would finish off their check-in process in person. He also offers delivery, but he does this in a hybrid remote way as well, meaning he doesn't deliver the car to the guest, knock on the door, give the guest the key, and small talk for a bit. But instead, he delivers the car to the guest location, leaves the car there with a lockbox, and then they leave the car. This saves a lot of time that would be spent going over the vehicle, answering questions, or simply mingling. When guests do utilize fully remote key exchanges, he has a bucket that guests can put the lockboxes in prior to them leaving the lot, which limits the number of times that a guest either unintentionally or intentionally loses or breaks a lockbox. Something that I've run into a number of times. I think the best way to describe Alvin's key exchange process is fluid. Alvin doesn't lock himself or his team to being at a specific place at a specific time, and instead relies on his cars being at specific locations within a time range. For example, if a car has a 2 p.m. delivery, that car most likely will not be delivered at 2 p.m., but instead will be delivered well before that and have the lockbox placed at the vehicle. That way the car is ready by 2 p.m. This allows for operations to stay fluid depending on what becomes time sensitive and what needs to be prioritized. Again, something that I talk about very, very often. I think that if you want to have a successful Turo fleet and you don't want to be a slave to the Turo fleet, you need to keep your operations relatively flexible and fluid. And I think that remote key exchanges are the best way to accomplish this. And then you can, of course, take the remote key exchange model and sort of modify it to meet your goals, expectations, and situation. Now, I know maintenance is a topic that many people are curious about whenever it comes to a Turo fleet, because the reality is you have to deal with maintenance if you want to own cars on Turo, especially if you want to have a large fleet on Turo. And unlike HP&I, who do all or most of our maintenance in-house, Alvin utilizes a number of vendors. He has a tire shop that does basic maintenance and repairs from tires to brakes, rotors, alignments. He has a secondary shop that specializes in more complex repairs like engine issues. And he has a mobile mechanic that comes out to his location or the guest location for extended rentals and does oil changes. I spent just about 2 days with Alvin and his team, shadowing how he manages his fleet, how he optimizes things, and how he keeps his cars booked out. And truthfully, I think that the number one thing that this weekend showed me was that there are more than one way to skin a cat. There are so many ways to go about being successful with the same or similar business models. And I think that what's great about Turo is that we can peel back the curtain, look at how other hosts operate, and it can give you or I insight into how we can change and improve our operations. And while visiting Alvin didn't necessarily make me want to reinvent the wheel on how I operate my own fleet, it definitely did teach me ways that I can improve my own operations, and I hope that this video did the same thing for you. Now, I do have a video planned for the future talking about the actual co-hosting side of Alvin's business. Talking about his arrangement with his hosts, how he gets investors, the cut, how repairs and maintenance and payments work. This is something that I am going to be going into a lot more depth in the future, so stay tuned for that video. Co-hosting isn't something that I've talked about a lot on my channel because the reality is I think that there are a lot of co-hosts out there that shouldn't be in this business. And I don't want to make videos about co-hosting and then have some of my viewers go to these bad co-hosts. But this is a topic that I get asked all the time, so I did want to start making some videos covering this topic, and I wanted to educate myself on how co-hosting works. Because like I mentioned earlier, this isn't something that I particularly practice. But Alvin is the real deal, and prior to making videos with him, I had him send me all of his financial information so I could verify that the claims he makes regarding earnings were in fact accurate. And they are. So with Alvin, I think he's a great person to highlight what's possible with co-hosting if that's a route that you want to pursue. Either from the perspective of an investor who would send cars to a host, or if you're somebody who's a host who wants to start hosting investor vehicles. If you're interested in sending a car to Alvin, you can check out his website at www.rentoutmycars.com. And like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.